part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Producing While Asian. This is Don Mike, your host, and today's conversation is with my good friend Amanda L. Andrei. Amanda is a Filipino-Romanian American playwright who specializes in myths and legends, and it's actually because of her that my production company Latido had its beginnings, because it was in a play of hers that she cast me in that I met my co-founder Reggie. So I hope you enjoy today's conversation, and welcome again to Producing While Asian. So welcome to Producing While Asian, Amanda. It's so good to have you here and to just see you so often online in the recent past. Yeah. So how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing great. Yeah.
Getting through this pandemic. So
That's right. That's right. Through writing. Yeah.
Through writing. And that's what we're here to talk about. It's, I've wanted to have just a really diverse group of Asian AAPI identifying people on this podcast, and having you was really important to me because there's a lot that's happened in my life that wouldn't have happened if you and I hadn't met. So I want to shout you out from the rooftops and tell the world about you. So I'm so glad you're here. So I'm just gonna let you take it away. So tell our audience a little bit about who Amanda L. Andrei is, how you got to where you are in your career.
Yeah, wow. So I am a Filipino Romanian American playwright. I am originally from the Virginia, DC area, and about 4 years ago, I moved out to LA to kind of really start pursuing playwriting and writing and an artistic career, like more professionally and more seriously. And so like Don Mike, you and we obviously met through a play, which was really cool, through the first play that I had ever written, which is, that's just like really, really special there. So I guess the origin story of that play, I wrote it when I was an undergraduate. It was my senior year. I was at William and Mary in Williamsburg, and it was just this play featuring like a Filipino family in the southern Philippines, kind of during the World War II era. And it was based on a family legend in my family, just about sort of this like tragic incident that happened where the husband of this woman in my family, he fell in love with the maid, and then the woman's brothers came and killed everyone in the house except for the kids. And the story kind of grew from there and involved like a lot of Filipino magic. And Don Mike, obviously you were one of the brothers who was...
Heck yeah. Miguel.
Yeah, I know.
Miguel forever.
Oh my God. Miggy. No. And that was just I wrote it, that final year at William and Mary. And then I have to, thank one of my classmates, Keegan Cassidy, for producing it at the DC Fringe Festival the following year, and then working with like such an amazing local cast of Filipino Americans. And I will just never forget, Reggie telling me like, it was so refreshing to read a role that wasn't a janitor, it wasn't a maid, it wasn't, it just wasn't playing into like a lot of like Filipino stereotypes, yet was still like really, really Filipino. So that, and then I think having like the other cast members just encourage me to keep writing was really important. And so I kind of kept doing that for a few years after that play was produced, and I was working full time. I was in grad school. It was a lot, but Sky is still doing the plays. And so it kind of reached this tension of, how seriously are you going to take this? How seriously do you want to take it? And so I applied to MFA programs, and I was accepted to USC out here in LA. So then my family and we packed up and moved. I guess I should also mention I have 3 kids. At the time when I moved out to the MFA, I had 2 kids. So my husband and I moved out to LA with an almost 2-year-old and an 8-month-old. So it was pretty, I know, right? It's just like, and I think, it's one of those things where it's like, you just like try not to think about it. You don't think about it. Otherwise you're not going to do it. You could get too
Right.
scared. Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome. And so, just going back to what you mentioned, because we are, really focused on talking about like representation and all that, on this podcast because it's important. That's why we exist, talking about people like us that exist in this world that aren't like, the stereotypes that we've seen. We're real people with real jobs and real feelings. And,
Mhm.
I will agree with Reggie. And so, for our audience, if you haven't listened to prior episodes, Reggie Kabiko is my business partner for Latino Productions, co-founder. He and I met in Amanda's play. I remember the audition for your play, and I remember going to some building
Oh
downtown.
my God.
I was in this room full of Filipino people, and Reggie was there. And like, I think I've told Reggie the story, and if he hasn't heard it, like, Reggie, when you hear this, I'm so sorry. But like, Reggie to me was the most annoying person in the room. I was like, why is he talking to everyone? I don't understand. And he was just being Reggie, like getting to know the people in the room. But I was like in my 22-year-old actor life being like, you don't talk to anyone in the audition room. You
Mm.
concentrate on the lines you're going to read. And then I remember going into the room, and it was like you and Francis.
Oh my
And I can't
God.
remember who else was in there. And I read the lines, did the thing, and I walked out, and I was like, okay, like we'll see if I get this. And I was like, God, I really hope I'm not cast with that Reggie guy. Like he's just, oh man. And and then we got cast together, and I was like, oh man, that guy is here. So
Oh my
who knew?
God.
Who knew that we
That
would turn
is
out to be best friends?
an amazing origin story. And I don't, wow, I'm so glad that you shared that.
But it was, just on top of that, just really cool to be in a room full of people that
Yeah.
looked like me and to, be auditioning for a play that was Filipino. And it was that year at the Fringe Festival, there were two Filipino shows. It was yours and
Yes.
JR Nexus Russ.
Yes.
So, yeah, so just, in retrospect, you're just like,
I know.
wow,
It was
way bad,
amazing.
you know. So,
Yeah.
so it was called Every Night I Die. Why was that the title?
It comes from a poem, and I can't remember the poet now, but it was a book of bilingual Tagalog and English poetry that I had picked up while I was a student at Ateneo in the Philippines. So that was kind of another inspiration for the play, I guess I would say. So my junior year, I spent 6 months in the Philippines studying abroad there. And it, I mean, I wish like all Filipino Americans or, like anyone who's been displaced from their homeland or their parents or grandparents' homeland could really just like go and stay there for a while, because just that 6 months has, provided me with so much to write about, and it's sort of coming up to the point now where I miss the Philippines. I mean,
It's fun
when's the last
there.
time you were there? Last time I
I
was there was
was,
December 2019, like right
oh my
before the
God, me
pandemic.
too.
That's right.
Yeah, we were there
Wait,
at the
but I think
same
we just
time.
missed each other. I think we
Yeah,
just, yeah.
I was like early December, and the reason why I was there was not a very fun reason. My mom's brother had passed, and also I'm
Mm.
convinced I got COVID, convinced, because it was like right
I
before the
was
pandemic.
also really sick when I got back.
And
Yeah.
I'm like,
Mm.
because like months later, I'm like, oh, it came, a lot of cases came from Asia. I was in Asia, like
Right.
I flew through Hong Kong, like all that stuff. Super sick, didn't know, it didn't go away. Came back to the States, was sick for like 2 weeks. So, but that was the last time I was there. But it's just like, I agree with you. I had an experience when I was a kid where we lived there for a year and a half. And like, I'm so grateful
Mm.
for that, regardless of what the circumstances were, because they're a little sketchy. But,
It
I'm
always is,
glad that,
right?
right. I'm glad that
Yeah.
I got to know my family and the culture and just be there. And I went to, it was grade school. So I went to Montessori de
Mm.
Manila in BF in downtown Manila. And so, yeah, I agree. I think it's really important that if people are able to connect with their cultural past,
Yeah.
um, regardless of if they grew up there or not, just to know where they came from. If there's somebody who lives in an immigrated country like the United
Hmm.
States,
Hmm.
it kind of helps you. I don't know. Besides having a worldly view, like it really
It,
is helpful.
yeah. And it's funny too, because, my dad is Romanian, right? So, but that's like a totally different relationship with that homeland and that culture. And it's been interesting kind of negotiating the Filipino space. And I feel like that's one of the reasons that I do write and I want to share these stories, because I feel like my perspective is certainly colored by being, and here's where I can never find the right word for what I want to say. Some people like saying hapa, some people like saying mixed. I sometimes say mestiza or multiracial, but it's an experience that's like the same and different. My parents met in Romania, so that also feels particularly special to me. Like there's a whole untold story about Filipinos in the 60s, 70s, like traveling all over the world. And like one of the places they went was Eastern Europe, and then, came over here. My mom and dad came over to the States. And I feel like when I go to, there's something about going to the Philippines that definitely feels like kind of more homey and more, you like get off the plane in Ninoy Aquino Airport and you could like smell the bananas and like roasting chickens and the sweat.
Like the Philippines. And you get off and you
and it just
get there
in
the early morning and you just hear roosters and you're
yes. And like everyone claps when the plane lands and it's just like everyone's so happy to be home. It's just like it's such a good feeling. And I've been like a couple times, like the first time when I was 4, and then most recently December 2019, but that was only like 10 days, which is not enough. But then like going to Romania, it was like I've only been there once, and it was such a different experience to be like, I'm Romanian, but I definitely don't look like anyone walking around in the streets. Whereas like in the Philippines, it was like the first time I was like walking around, I was like, oh man, like everyone's brown. Like I'm actually kind of lighter than most folks. But then it's like such a range too of like of the skin colors. I don't know. I feel like I'm thinking about colorism a lot. It's also like a big thing in our community. So
it's very real. I mean, like especially in the Asian community, like colorism is huge. Like there's that play, I think it's called White Pearl, and it's literally about that and skin whitening products. Such a good show because like it's like the conference room of executives that are in charge of this product are all different Asian cultures, and so it's conversations between like East Asian and South Asian and Southeast Asian, and it was an incredible play. I saw it at Studio Theater in DC, so I do hope to see that one again. But free publicity for that play right now. But so it's pervasive because you go and when you're in the Philippines, there's big ass billboards that are like buy this skin whitening lotion, like look like whatever, and it's and it's just natural there. It's not something that's looked down upon because it's so ingrained, and like the colonial mindset is so part of the culture that people don't even think about it. And so,
Looking for new insights on the Cleveland sports scene with a unique side of Cleveland sports history? Then you found the perfect podcast. I'm John Sable.
And I'm Scott Sable, and we're hosts of the Sable Brothers on the Baseline podcast, a podcast about Cleveland sports, but not your typical podcast about the land's sports teams. Join us as we embark on a journey of sharing a unique and historical side of Cleveland sports history with the help of some former Cleveland sports stars and other historical figures.
All right here on the Sable Brothers on the Baseline podcast, part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hi, this is Amanda L. Andrei, and you're listening to Producing While Asian.
So on that, I know that's definitely, something you've now said is part of your writing. What made you want to go down the kind of myths and legends and folk tales route in both of your cultures, in Romania and Philippines? What kind of drew you down that path?
Yeah, I think while I was studying abroad, the spirituality in the Philippines was very strong. Now, and my mom has always been really like, I don't want to say religious because that makes it sound like it was very like organized and structured, but it's more like faith, right? Like I feel like Filipinos have such a deep faith, and they are so willing to believe, and they are also so enchanted by the world, and they like in the process also like enchant the world with their own, you know, songs and dance and food and everything. And so in the Philippines, my friends would just like, they would like, we would tell ghost stories on campus, and these weren't like historical ghost stories. They were like, no, my friend was studying like last week and she saw, you know what I mean? And then like I was my Tagalog language tutor, she, who is like also like very like faithful Christian woman, she was like, oh no, like there are aswang, like I've met them, you know. And so it's real, yeah. And it's like, yeah, they're by the gas station, do you know what I mean? It's very it's so it's like, I feel like in the States it's like more compartmentalized, and it's like it's in our media, or it's like an old urban legend, but in the Philippines it's like right there. I agree.
It's like more present, like in the Philippines. I feel like in America it's more like a gimmick, right? It's like, oh, we have ghosts and stuff to scare you, like not because it's like, oh, dead grandma's ghost literally lives in the room next door and she'll whisper to you while you're sleeping.
Oh my gosh, I know. And my friends, the stories are so wild. So so like the in Every Night I Die, there's this whole legend about if you so like the banana tree, if you go to it at night, like midnight, between like midnight and 3 a.m., and you just kind of wait there, and if you're worthy enough, this like stone or this little like anting will like, or muntia will like drop down the tree, but you have to like fight with the tree to get it. And then once you get it, you can like eat it, and then you have, or swallow it, and it lives inside you, and then you have these powers. So that was like a story that my friends were just like telling me as we're like hiking or whatever. And that really just captured me. And it's so different, you know, it's so different so now, because like now every time I see a banana tree, like here in LA, or like if I'm visiting anywhere else, I'm like, there's a stone inside. You know, I was like, if I come here at 3 a.m.
I'm a fight this tree.
I'm gonna fight this tree, right? Yeah. I'm gonna get some more some more juice. Yeah.
That's amazing.
So, yeah. I know.
That's cool. It's you know, it's always fascinating to hear like where people's artistic influence and what their muse is, and so to know where that came from for you. And so I know that afterwards, then you worked on several other projects, and there was one project that involved Romanian myths. And Romanian stories. So talk to us a little bit about that project.
Yeah, so that was my play, Lena Passes By, and it is about this super woman, super powered heroine named Lena Bala, and she is Filipina and Romanian. And in this Romanian play, she goes to her father's homeland of Romania to get a magical ingredient for him because he is sick and dying. And it's like kind of a traditional fairy tale structure, and she meets these Romanian fairy tale creatures along the way, like this woodpecker woman. She meets her in an Orthodox church, and then kind of this, his name is Diavol, which means like demon or devil in Romanian, but he's also kind of like a wolf man, because like werewolves, they also, I don't want to say like originated in Romania, but there's like a strong sense of the werewolf in Romania. And I have thoughts on that. I think that's from like the original peoples of that land, the Dacians, and then like with the Romans, when the Romans came and like conquered them, and like wolves were strong in both cultures. And I think the pain and the trauma of the conquest kind of gave birth to this monster of the werewolf, or like the pricolich in Romania. So it's full of Romanian folklore, and it was inspired, actually, that play was inspired by reading my mom's letters. I have a bunch of her letters and photographs from her time in Romania and kind of like all over when she was like traveling between the Philippines and Eastern Europe. And there's like a lot of pain in the letters, and they're old. They're like 40 or 50 years old, but kind of just talking about what she was going through while she was with my dad, because what happened was, like, Romania did not allow marriages between Romanians and non-Romanians. Like, it was frowned upon. It was like very nationalistic, and there was like a lot of xenophobia, and that was because of a lot of communism and like Soviet policies and everything. And so I don't know, I kind of like don't want to give too much away because it's said in the play. But it's like, so like whoever's listening, just like reach out. We could talk about the play, or like it's available on like New Play Exchange. We'll talk about that more later. But yeah, it's I think for me, a lot of the time too, folklore and myth and the supernatural is a way to access a lot of the intergenerational like pain and trauma, but also just kind of the liminal space like that we live in as like shapeshifters, right? Like, I'm willing to say that as someone who is like multiracial, mixed, mestiza, that I kind of shapeshift depending on the context that I'm in. And I would say that's probably true for a lot of Filipinos too, because we have that same trauma of conquest,
Right. It falls into like the idea of like code switching,
Yeah.
like in terms of when you speak, like, I do it all the time, like in terms of like if I'm around my family versus if I'm around Filipinos versus if I'm around like Americans or just other people of color, it's like if I'm, it's weird because you don't really think about it until you think about it, and you're like, oh yeah, like I do that because you're trying to assimilate in a way and not be othered in those situations. So speaking of that, as a female identifying playwright who is BIPOC with immigrant parents, tell us a little bit about some struggles you might have faced in your experience, just trying to make your name and trying to make yourself known in this community, which, it's been said in past interviews that, the theatrical industry and entertainment industry is very white male led. And even if you're gay, you're usually still a white male. So, talk to us a little bit about, kind of you're navigating that as a playwright.
Yeah, wow. I think I'll probably like the main thing that came to mind has been being a parent and in this industry, being a mom of 3 small kids. And yeah, it's difficult because you just have less time than everyone else, but also it's like, I want a family, and so it's like, what's this balance? There is no balance. That's the funny thing, because people ask me, they're like, how do you do it? Like, how do you balance it? And I'm just like, I don't. Nah. So it's been a struggle. I mean, that makes it sound like it's like really difficult.
It's not.
I know it's not. Yeah, exactly. It's just like it's what it is, right? It's one of those, it's again, like you try not to think about it too much. You can look back at it, but because theater, it goes late, right? So like oftentimes I would not see my kids at like bedtime or dinner, or like I'm writing and they come in with something, they want to do something and they interrupt like my concentration. And I think at the same time, they've really, it's because of them that it kind of like kickstarted me into being like, yeah, I want to do playwriting, because I was like, I don't have a lot of time, even though we all have the same amount of time, but I was like, now I have less time. But they kind of like structured me. They were like, here's a schedule. And I found ways to like make the writing and like make the other work like fit in there. And then they've also just given me like a lot of like good content. I've written like a TYA play, like a theater for young audiences play, about how to explain to my daughter that her Lola, like my mom, passed away, right? And how can she reconnect with her Lola, even though her Lola is like no longer here on earth and stuff. And then I also went through some pretty bad like postpartum anxiety after my first kid. And it's just like, I don't know, man. Like it's like, I don't know I'm still figuring it out, right? Like that's one of the questions for me. It's like, how can we use theater to support stories of those parents who may have gone through like difficult birthing experiences, and just like kind of like what happens to your body, and then also the way that the medical industry and like corporations treat birthing people. Like it's just really, it's a lot. There's a lot there. So that's that, like I write a little bit about that as well in plays, and I've like written that in some essays. But it's hard when we are in this industry that's always telling us to like go, go, go. And I don't know, I think being female identifying and what that means to me, it means like listening to my body, like when it's that time of the month, I need to take a nap. You know what I mean? And it's like, I can't go, go, go. And then it's like, when I'm pregnant, I just can't do as much stuff. And just trying to, you know, maybe not necessarily like mold myself to the system, but carve out my own space and try to make the system work around me. But yeah,
it's like
it's not
that
easy.
idea of like getting in and like changing it from the inside, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like why I became a producer. I was like,
Yeah.
I like performing, I like all of that, but like things won't change unless, you know, people like me make a concerted effort to get a seat at the table. You know, like
Yes.
you won't have stories of Filipino people or Filipino Romanian people if you aren't at that table. You know, and just to inspire others to get a seat and start talking about it. So
No,
now,
I love that, because it's also like we all help each other, right? Like,
right.
like you're
Right.
producing, and it's like, oh, it's like a perfect relationship, and like you're acting, you know, or like, so playwrights need actors, playwrights need producers, like we all need each other in that way. Yeah,
And there may be some exciting stuff next for us, you know, that we've been kind of starting to talk about, and you know, we'll see. But and it just takes connection, you know, and I think that
exactly.
that idea of community, like building community and support, and that can happen anywhere. So like if you write a play, you know, you attract the team, and then the team attracts the actors, and all of a sudden you have this community of people that now are all connected and hopefully continue the
like
pattern and the path.
Because so. I just love the idea that like my plays are making like little barcadas, you know, because that's what I see, like, you know, with you and Reggie did, you know, the fact that you guys met and then like went off. I mean, that's kind of what I love about the plays. That's sort of like a hidden effect that we don't really see. So
yeah, and it's interesting because there's a lot of people that judge the arts that don't realize that that's kind of what the arts does. You know, it's like the arts brings people together, it builds community, it creates empathy, you know, all that stuff. And so there's just, you know, muggles who are like, like, we're just gonna cut arts funding, and like arts aren't that important. It's like, no, it's so important because it's like the human condition. Like, but I can go on and on about that. And so I think it's just it's important. And
definitely.
So speaking of, you know, being a self-made playwright and all of your experiences in the past, and you've gone through some excellent programs and like super well accomplished. Where have you fallen on a scale of 1 to producer? Because producers are different in every industry, in every field, in every sub part of our entertainment industry. You know, some people have it to different degrees. So where do you fall? Because I know you definitely have those conversations trying to get your work seen and produced. So where would you consider yourself on that spectrum?
That's so funny. I don't know. I want to say like 3.5 or like 4 or something. And I think it's funny because I guess I didn't realize that like a bunch of work that I was doing would be considered producing. I just sort of like fell into it naturally with like trying to work like with the producers or something. I'd be like, oh, can I bring this, or can I contact someone for you? Or I should like bump up the score a bit too, because it's like right now I'm working with this Denver-based group called Bucharest Inside the Beltway, and I sort of like created this like virtual residency, and we're like virtually producing a showcase of their plays. And it's just funny because I'm just kind of like, yeah, this is just what you do. And I haven't thought of myself as a producer. I'm also trying to get into film a little bit more too. And that's sort of like a different ball game for me, but I have done like, it's funny because a long time ago, like 15 years ago, I did work with the DC APA Film Festival, which was like, that was amazing. That was kind of from the very beginning of script to end and like showing of the film and stuff. And I'd like to get back into it. I have a friend, my writing partner, Ara Chaudhary, and she's Filipina and Bengali, and she's in the Bay Area, and we're writing a feature together, and she's currently in the midst of fundraising for a short. And so that's like an area that I want to branch into as well and just kind of figure it out. But yeah, I think it goes back to like, who are the people we want to work with, and like working on projects that we really, really believe in. So I guess from that angle, it's like, oh, I guess I have been producing for a while.
Right, because it just happens. Like, you don't realize it because producing, because people think producers are like these people that are, live in offices and like have a lot of money and
right
and but like producing is just organizing. It's literally just being an organized person, and like remembering who you come in contact with, and having the ability to remember enough to like connect people. And that's really it. And a lot of people have those skills without even realizing, like you just said, like you're like, oh yeah, like I do that stuff. So it's just something that comes, I think it's built in to whatever sub group we are within the arts. Because to some extent, as artists, we have to self-organize and get things together, unless there's some random occurrence where somebody who like has a lot of support for the arts wants to like believe in you. But like otherwise, you have to like kind of do it yourself. But
I think it's also like, because when did you sort of start doing theater? Like I started in high school.
Yeah, same. Like
around high school,
sophomore year of high school, I started being in shows.
It's funny because because I was reflecting on this, because I was like, man, the bar, like the barrier to, there was no barrier to entry, or it was very, very, very low. It was like just audition for this show, but it wasn't, I mean, like I think very fondly of high school theater because that's where you make our best friends there and everything. And it was just like, like everyone just kind of pitches in, right? Like, okay, you're lead actress, but you're also like painting the set, So I like to think of like the roots of theater in that light. Like, what did we do when we were young and happy?
Young and happy.
We're still young and happy. We're still, that's right. I know. Maybe not so single, but
like over here, like real single, but.
Oh my God, that's another podcast.
Shoot me a DM when you have.
I know. Oh my God.
It's I agree. Like high school theater was, it was, you got involved because you could get involved. It wasn't like, oh no, you can't do that. Even the people who like weren't that great could still get involved and just be part of whatever. There was a place for them, and I think that really like taught us all like where we wanted to go. I mean, I didn't realize that I wanted to sit in the producer seat until after college. But, you look back and you're like, wow, like I would do stuff like that, or I would be in charge of this, that, and the other. And so it all made sense. So.
Want to hear more about your favorite TV shows and movies that are on countless streaming services?
Then listen to Up Next with your new favorite hosts, me, Kristen Aviles.
And me, Christina Walter.
Every other week, we'll highlight one genre, but 2 movies or TV shows, one old and one new.
We'll let you know what's hot and what's not from your favorite
or least favorite
streaming services.
And be sure to stay tuned to the end of each episode where we shout out an artist whose name you should know for their talent in the industry.
So follow us to stay up to date with your favorite hosts from Up Next,
a part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
This is Mike Voorhees, co-host of the Swing in a Tribe MLB podcast. If you love Cleveland Indians baseball, then this is the pod for you. We've got you covered each week as we talk about all the games, breaking news, trades, the roster, all things Tribe. You're going to love it. Go Tribe.
Hi, this is Amanda L. Andrei, and you're listening to Producing While Asian.
So was it in college where your writing identity came out more, or was it also in high school that you're like, oh, I should write shows,
Ooh, that's
what made you kind of make the hop?
that's a great question. I like to think that ink runs through my blood because my mom was a journalist. Yeah, and your family too. You also come from like a media kind of family. Yeah, my mom was a journalist, and so I grew up around writing. And I think I started, it's cool now also, like just like watching my daughter, because my daughter is 6 years
Yeah.
old and she makes her own books and like
Oh,
comics and stuff, and she's like learning how to
yeah.
write. And it's like watching her, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm like reminded I was doing similar stuff when I was a kid, because there were just so many books in our house and my mom was always writing. And so writing came at such an early age for me. But then I would say playwriting, it took a while to get there, which makes a lot of sense too, because I started doing theater sophomore year of high school, and then 7 years later I write my first play, right? And then like 5 or 6 years after that, I'm like, okay, let me do this professionally. So it was a long arc, but at the same time, like not that long. But yeah, I think when it's just like surrounding you and growing up. But yeah, I feel like to a certain extent I've like always been writing, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. And, you kind of get to a point where you talk to your family about it, and you kind of ask like your parents and your, extended family, like, did you think that I would do something like this, or whatever? And like, just like you're talking about your daughter, like my extended family and like my parents were like, yeah, like you're a producer now, but like when you were 10 years old and you'd force us all to sit in the living room and watch your like action figure concerts, like back when, it was like NSYNC and stuff, but like, so it was like a living room produced event. And now I'm like, look, now I'm doing it for real with like real people. And, and sometimes you personally forget like what you used to do. And so, but of course, you get those titas who always remind you of it. Like,
I know.
Like
they
so
never let you forget.
like they meet someone new in your life and they're just like, oh yeah, so this one time when he like forced us in the living room and like listened to pop music while he like paraded action figures around.
You could be like holding an Oscar in each hand and they would just be like, yes, that's on Mike. These action figures.
Well, I think there's something to be said about going for what you want, and especially in a society that puts a lot of barriers up for people that look like us, and striving to find our allies. Because I really hope people don't see this podcast as like, oh, we're like only going to talk with people who are AAPI and like screw everybody else. And I'm like, no, it's like, I would love to have allies on this show, but it's like, in season 1 right now, it's important to talk about the talent, like the main show, like us.
Yes.
And so then maybe we'll have allies later. But
and also it's like exactly, and also thinking about like who identifies as AAPI, because it's already so diverse in there. Like, like you already named off a couple things for me, like daughter of immigrants and like multiracial and everything, parent, right? But then there's also the folks who are like, I don't know, like multilingual, or like they just immigrated, or they're like 5th or 6th generation in the States, and it's
been here for a while.
And I also shout out too, because we're Asians that like you're in Pittsburgh, I'm from Virginia, and like traditionally those are like not like, people don't really associate Asian Americans with those locations. But I love that like Filipinos and Asian Americans are everywhere, and I love hearing those stories too. Yeah.
Well, Filipinos and Filipino dash anything, it's like the largest growing AAPI population in the country. And not just because of just normal immigration, but like all of the like medical immigration that's happening within our community. So, I feel like Filipinos are about to be like, a force to be reckoned with in this country. And it showed, I don't want to get too political, but it showed in the last election that Filipinos really, got together and, to be seen. Shout out to Filipino Americans for Biden-Harris.
Yes.
And, it was like a crazy amalgamation of nationwide Filipinos coming together in each state to contact their community. So, and it's kind of like what we're doing in the arts and producing, we're calling out to our community. And so, by doing things on purpose that represent us. So speaking of who's coming to our calls and all of our, announcements of, hey, work with us, if there's somebody out there who's listening who is also inspired and wants to be a writer, tell us a little bit about this is very college interview, but tell us a little bit about if there was something that you could pass on to the next person, and it doesn't have to be 1 or 3, it can be however much you want. If there was some tidbit of knowledge you want to pass on, to the next round, or even somebody who's our age trying to make it work and they're just struggling, what would you confer upon them in terms of just practical advice?
Yeah, I would say you're worth it. You are worth the time and the energy of investing in yourself as a writer, as a creative, as an artist. And it may be expensive. It will be expensive. It will be time consuming. It will be painful, but it will also be really joyful. And I just think too that artists, we struggle so much with rejection, not just from others and external validation, but also self-rejection. And I think a lot of our writing is trying to figure out, who am I? What am I made of? Where do I come from? Where am I going? Those really basic questions. And I would just say to anyone who is thinking about pursuing writing, or maybe is in the middle of writing and is having a downtime, like me right now. No, I'm slightly blocked on a project. So this is advice for myself too, but you're worth it. You're really worth it. It's one of the best ways you can love and accept yourself if you really dig in there. It's like a geode, right? You just break it open and there's all that beautiful shining crystal. So
that's so beautiful. It's so inspiring.
You're worth it, Don Mike, and listeners.
You're worth it, Amanda.
Yes, you're all worth it.
It's so worth it. But you're right, though. You have to believe in that to keep going. Because if you don't, you'll discourage yourself from doing things. And I think not being afraid of no either is the other part of it. I used to think of no as failure. No to me is okay, choose another option. Not failure. So it's if you hit a no, then you're okay, well, I'm going to go over here now and see what on this side of whatever it is you're pursuing. So just persistency and patience, and it all eventually, and you tell me if you agree with me or not, but eventually it pays off where people then either start approaching you or projects start appearing in your inbox that you're oh, that's strange. I didn't know I would, be considered for that, or, all that stuff. So it does show itself later, in terms of the hard work and the believing in yourself and trying to find the right people to get behind you. But because we all know this world is a little difficult sometimes, and people like to lie, but
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I'm gonna offer the scary and controversial counterpoint of
please do.
Of maybe it won't happen. I think that's and I honestly wish I could kind of hear more stories about people where it didn't happen and how that person dealt with the fallout. I feel like I saw some of those stories, or I don't know, I shouldn't say saw, but I met folks who kind of lived some of those stories, especially in the DC area. There were folks who had been artists and then it couldn't work and then they switched to something else. And it's funny, I had sort of an existential crisis thinking about this, thinking about it, what if it doesn't work out? Because there's a concept, I think it's called survivor bias, that it's oh, well, if this thing survived, it must have been good, right? And there are examples of this. I think the most basic one is there were these World War II planes. Like they recovered the planes and they were like shot in certain areas, and people were like, oh, like these planes must have been good because they, you know, they like survived the bullet damage. And it's like, no, you're not counting the planes that you didn't recover, if that makes sense. So you're looking at the stuff that didn't happen. And so I guess I say this like, because when I kind of had that thought that like, what if it never happens for me?
Absolutely.
Like, what if I never get kind of like that external validation? It then changes the game, because it's like, what do I do to make myself happy? And how can I continue being happy and creative in a world that might never recognize me, but I keep recognizing myself and I keep seeing myself like all the time. It's not easy to do. I don't think it's a normal or like natural. You kind of have to like figure out or train yourself how to do it.
Oh, yeah.
And this is also at the same time to say that like, I think as humans, we need external validation. So no one should feel guilty about being like, I want that prize. That's me right now, but yeah, I don't know. It's like, we're just like unpacking a lot of deep stuff, but it's good to think about and talk about.
People like to talk about actors and like, oh, they just like want attention, but that's part of it. I mean, to some extent as artists, whether you're a writer or producer or an actor or whatever, that audience part is still part of it. And if you even look at non-arts jobs, like you look at somebody who may be working in an office, there are still awards that people go after. There's still that external validation that you're talking about. It's just less obvious, like for theater, it's obvious, like people are clapping and screaming, but like it's, it's back to that thing we talked about earlier, like you have to believe in yourself. And I know for me personally, like people ask, why do you keep producing? Like, even though it's a very unclear, unsure career path, because you don't know if you're going to make money off of whatever it is you're trying to do, or if you don't know if the next project is going to be successful or not. And I actually thought about it the other day, kind of like how you're thinking about what if it doesn't work out? Like, I think it just has to do with like this gut feeling. Like, I feel like I still need to do this. I feel like I still need to be in this conversation. And like, that's what keeps me going, regardless of rejections or people that don't work with me or whatever. I feel like there's always going to be somebody or something that will respond to the work I do, which I feel might be similar to what you're feeling. Like, there's always going to be someone that will want to read your play, that will want to produce your play, to continue that conversation. You just have to find them, which, is very interesting, because like I'm terrible at dating, and like, you have to keep finding till you find the person. But like, it's the same thing in the arts. So you find your, whatever, your 110% supporter, or like whoever.
Yes. I'm so glad you brought up the gut feeling. I think that's also really important for artists, that we just, for me, like when I think about it, like I think a lot of it comes like from my ancestors, right? I think they didn't get to tell their stories. And so I feel like there's this like, big conspiracy on the other side, right? They're like, we're going to help Amanda tell our stories, And so whatever that is for someone, that gut feeling, I think that's so real. And I'm so glad you brought that up. And it's like trusting yourself, trusting, your barcata, trusting the folks on the other side who are rooting for you, like all of that. It's
so cool that you've also kept talking about the gut feeling, because like, and talking about ancestors kind of like coming through you, right? So weird short story. Like my mom's family was super but their career was in broadcasting in the Philippines, and it had been my grandfather's dream to open a franchise of his corporation in America. So much so that like and I didn't know this till I started talking about it myself, that like my dad came to me one day and he was like, yeah, your grandpa was actually serious about it. Here's my FCC ID that he paid for.
Oh my God.
Is the key to starting something here. And granted, while I'm not like starting a radio station, like I'm creating my own brand. And it's like in that moment, which I feel you feel through your writing, that like, it like all made sense. I was like, I'm doing all this stuff and I wanted to do this. And why am I doing this? Like, because they're all half a world away. And he's now passed and he's no longer on this earth. But it's like, there you are. And, it's like little signs like that. You're like, yep, that's real. Like ancestors pushing you toward a certain goal is real. And, destiny, I guess, if you want to think about it in that sense. Like, and people get really weirded out about that. But I'm just like, no, I think it's great because it gives you something to hope for. And something to think about. And, I get a lot of anxiety about dying. So it's like, the idea that like maybe after now, there's another life and there's another
legacy.
Place you can inspire people that come after you, so, which I think is why we leave work behind.
Yes. It's your ancestors saying, you're worth it. You're worth it. We're worth it. We're all worth it. Yes.
We're going to name this episode You're Worth It.
You're worth it. Yes, we are. I love it.
I love it.
Oh my God.
Yeah. With that, where can people, I know you mentioned earlier, but kind of give us a little bit of rundown where people can find your work, read your stuff, contact you. Because I think that's the other part of this podcast is like, now that I'm shouting all these people out and highlighting that, how can you now be connected with people that are listening or other people who have been on the show and want to do a project?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is www.amandalandrei.com. And Andrei is Andrei. It's the Romanian spelling. And I have there my email. I also have links to my Twitter and my Instagram. And I'm trying to like be better about having a newsletter. Because
newsletters are so hard.
They're so hard. Oh my God. But it's like, I feel like I'm kind of like, reflecting on myself as an artist. And I'm like, okay, yeah, there's my playwriting and my plays. But then I also really like to teach. I really like to do like generative writing workshops. And so I'm going to try and like start mentioning those offerings like in my newsletter and like to a certain extent like on my Instagram. But like I love talking to people on Twitter. I love looking at people's Instagram stories, so that's definitely like a good way. And then my plays are up on New Play Exchange, although that I believe is a subscription-based platform. So if you're like a theater person, definitely great to get on and like check out and find new plays from everyone. And I can also like totally happy to like email someone a play or like talk about the play. But yeah, those are like good places to find me. And I love teaching. I have like some upcoming classes on like writing with herbs, and I'm trying to develop more classes on like writing with monsters and writing with your ancestors. So like we'll see in the next year or so. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. That sounds so fun. And so that'll be on like in person or virtual, those classes? Or both?
Ooh, probably virtual. At some point I would love to start doing in person again, because LA is kind of like opening up more and everything, and it's so many cool spaces here. But yeah.
All right. Well, it was really good chatting with you and learning just even
so
more
good
about
to see you.
And good to see your face. And I know people listening on streaming won't see our faces, but if you go to the YouTube page, you can watch this interview and see.
We're very beautiful.
We're very beautiful. We're just the prettiest. And so, producingwhileasian.com, get to our YouTube page. But, like I say to all guests, Amanda, come back anytime you want. Let us know if there's something you want to chat about in the future, and we will, make it happen. And there's plenty of other topics to talk about, things to discuss, and other people to connect with through this podcast, because I really look forward to having more, even small group conversations about stuff. So
that would be great.
Well, until then, thanks so much for being here. We'll
Thank you. Yes. Take care.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Producing While Asian podcast. Our theme song was created by Luckstock. We are produced by Press Play Podcasts, and the show is edited by Michael Santos Sandoval. If you have a moment, please leave a review and a rating, and be sure to send us any topic ideas you have to producingwhileasian@gmail.com. To follow us, stay updated, and read our blog, visit www.producingwhileasian.com. We hope you join us again soon.